Because the timeline is lazy, the data source has some restrictions. The first one is it has to be indexed. With this I mean it has to implement the container indexed interface, as well as it has to be ordered chronologically. Again, this is because the laziness. And finally, it has to contain two properties, a time property and a value property. I could show you an example of how you could construct this. It's very basic. You just create a container which implements the container indexed. Then you add to it the two properties, the timestamp property and the value property. The property IDs can be anything you like. The timeline contains these convenience property IDs which you can use, but of course you can select your own. The timestamp property needs to be a Java util date, which it uses to get the date. And the value have to be a numerical value. Internally it uses floats, so you have to be able to cast it to a float. And then there's some random stuff doing there, but nothing worth mentioning. Actually, I generate some random data here, so it's nothing important. Okay, so now that we have a data source, which should work, we have the timeline API. How do we add our data source to the timeline? Well, for each data source, you should have a graph, or vice versa actually. For each graph, there has to be a data source. So you have these two methods to add the data source. The first one is add graph data source. With this you can add a graph. As parameters it takes the data source and the value and timestamp property IDs. The markers have a similar interface. It uses the set marker data source. But as you note, you can only add one marker data source at this time. And here's an example of how you can use timeline. Here I've used giving it a caption. You can leave it empty if you want to. Here I add a graph data source. I use our previous method, which is shown, and then I add the timestamp and the value property IDs. And here's the equal for the markers. The markers have a caption. It's the small symbol shown in the bottom corner. This V here, or this S here. These are the captions. Of course, if you give it a bigger caption than one letter, it will overflow or it won't be visible. So you should. Okay. Well, you have your graph. It looks good. By default, it's all black. All new graphs added to the timeline is black. So if you have many, they will look kind of smudgy. So you probably want to customize and style it a bit. Before you customize the graphs, you probably want to customize the UI itself. By default, the timeline looks like I showed you in the demo. It has all these features, but users probably don't want all these features. So you can customize what is visible in the timeline component. And for that, I've created some methods, which you hopefully can see. For each UI component in the timeline, you can set it visible or not. I'm going to show you how this is done. Okay, here we have the timeline with all its components. This is basically a screenshot of what you just saw in the demo. It has the zoom levels, chart modes, browser stuff. Okay. Here I've removed the browser. This means the main area gets bigger, you get a bigger view of the graphs themselves, but with it you also lose some browsability. You can't browse in the timeline equally good as you did with the browser. However, you can browse by dragging the main area over here. Or you can zoom in by using the mouse scroll wheel. But that's about it in browsing. Then you can go further. You can hide the zoom levels and the range. This will also move up this bar over here. So it will again, the middle area will get more space. But you still can select the chart modes and you can see the legend. Finally, if you don't want anything, you can do it. You can hide everything. This will give you the maximum space available for the chart. This is probably what you want to do if you just want to show some simple graph or something which doesn't need explanation. You explain it beside in a caption or in a text or something. Okay. So now that we have our UI components how we like it, we can set the colors of the graphs with a multitude of different methods. Here's just a few I've added, which sets some outline colors and outline thickness and stuff like that. But there's more, and I didn't include them all because they wouldn't fit the screen. What you can't do with these methods, you can do with CSS, so you can style it pretty much how you like it. Finally, I have an example of this, which is by Joni's design. Basically, you can style it however you like. Here I've added black as a background, styled the grid, styled everything. And basically, you can get it how you like it. That's about it. I won't show you any more because I think that's the main features. I hope you go and try it. It can be found in the directory. Just type in timeline, you can find it there. That's it. Any questions?